Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're tracking the journey of every level of investor, specifically focusing on the path from your very first $100 to your first million. I want you to think back to the first time you ever bought a stock or, put money into an index fund. How did your mindset actually change as your account balance grew? Well, let's dive right into this. Because what we're really talking about here isn't just a basic story about accumulating cash. It's actually a profound, highly structured psychological evolution. We're going to explore exactly how your brain is quite literally forced to adapt as the math scales up. So there's this profound truth in the investing world. Most people never actually lose money in the stock market. They lose it in the gap between what they thought investing was and what it actually is. And that gap between expectation and reality, it exists because our expectations are usually shaped by Hollywood movies, social media bragging, and highlight reels. The reality, though, is just a cold, indifferent mathematical engine. Bridging that gap has a massive, massive cost, and it's measured in actual dollars and in years of your life. To understand exactly how we bridge that gap, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving chronologically through 5 distinct psychological thresholds. 1. The sandbox. 2. The learning tax. 3. The compounding click. 4. The quiet threshold. And finally, number 5, embracing uncertainty. All right, kicking things off with section 1, the sandbox. This covers levels 1 and 2, which takes you from 0 up to your first $1,000. Okay, so this is where you first download the app. You hook up your bank account and you make a tiny deposit, maybe 20 or 50 bucks, mostly because it feels like an amount you can safely afford to lose. But there's this huge contrast between the illusion of that app and the actual reality of the market. The interface is literally designed to make you feel like an absolute insider. You get the exact same candlestick charts, the same real-time news feeds, and the same complex order types as a seasoned pro trading on Wall Street. It gives you this instant rush of confidence. But the reality? The market doesn't even know you exist. Your 20 bucks isn't really being managed. It's just sitting in a digital bucket. The algorithm is completely 100% indifferent to you. And since you're just at the edge of the room playing in a system you don't really fully understand yet, you inevitably hit it. The first real loss. We're not talking about a catastrophic wipeout here. We're talking about a $47 or maybe $93 paper loss. You bought something just because it went up for a few days, it suddenly drops, and you just freeze. Why? Because it's human nature. We are deeply hardwired with loss aversion. You absolutely refuse to click sell because selling is an admission of defeat. Keeping it as a paper loss keeps the hope alive that, hey, maybe it'll bounce back. It's a totally normal human response, driven by confident but pretty uninformed opinions. And honestly, it officially marks the beginning of your real education. Which brings us to our second era, the learning tax. This covers levels 3 and 4, taking us from $1,000 up to $25,000. By this point, you've crossed the $1,000 mark, and suddenly, the emotional stakes have some real teeth. You're no longer playing with house money. You are now paying what we call the learning tax. It's the literal, actual price you pay to discover, through direct financial experience, the difference between what you believed and what actually happens. So how do you pay this tax? Well, paradoxically, it usually happens when you win. You find some totally unproven strategy that happens to work 2 or 3 times in a row. And honestly, that is genuinely the worst thing that can happen to a beginner, because it builds false conviction. You think you've cracked the code, so you upsize your next position, and then the strategy fails spectacularly. Your $3,000 account drops 15% in a day, and suddenly you're paying a very real 450 bucks in tuition to the market. Now, as you push through to level 4, building your capital up to $25,000, you hit another massive wake-up call to the tune of $18,000. Where on earth does a number like that come from? It comes from the sudden, glaring visibility of fees. When your account was just a few $100, a 1% fee was literal pennies. You didn't care. Now the friction in the system becomes completely impossible to ignore. Let's look at the math. If you compare a standard 0.03% index fund fee against a 0.75% active management fee on a $20,000 position, compounding over 20 years at an 8% return, the math of small differences becomes terrifyingly clear. I mean, it looks like a simple rounding error at first glance, right? It's less than a 1% difference. But over time, that tiny percentage point acts like a parasite on your compounding growth. It ultimately costs you close to $18,000 in net difference. This is the exact level where you realize that optimizing your costs is just as crucial as picking the right investments. Moving right along, we enter section 3, the compounding click, We're moving through levels 5 and 6 now, from $25,000 up to $250,000. This is the era where your behavior dictates your trajectory way more than any external market factor. The defining feature of this phase is the compounding click. It is that specific, almost magical mathematical moment when your account actually makes more money from market movement in a single month than you deposit it from your paycheck. The math stops being theoretical. You log in, and you realize your money has essentially gone to work and earned a second salary entirely on its own. Your portfolio is finally out-earning your contributions, and let me tell you, it is one of the most psychologically empowering moments an investor can ever experience. So how does this momentum actually build? At level 5, the mechanics of your wealth start to shift. You start caring deeply about tax efficiency. The difference between holding a stock for 364 days versus 366 days suddenly shifts from short-term to long-term capital gains, which literally saves you thousands of dollars in real money. Then, as you cross 100K at level 6, you quietly enter the top 10% of American investors. The conversations around you change because you now have real texture and context to add. By the time you push toward 250K, your brokerage is actively trying to keep you happy. They're unlocking professional data feeds, institutional research. Your knowledge is compounding rapidly, right alongside your capital. But with serious money comes the potential for serious, deeply painful mistakes. Specifically, the $30,000 concentration error. You aren't making $93 sandbox mistakes anymore. Because you have sophisticated knowledge now, you can construct these highly complicated spreadsheet-backed arguments for a single, massive stock bet. But fundamentally, it's just blind conviction dressed up in deep macro analysis. And because you're so sure of yourself, you might allocate 30 or 40% of your net worth into one single idea. Being wrong at this level doesn't just bruise your ego. It can wipe out 3 or 4 years of hard-earned progress in a flash. If you survive that, it brings us to Section 4, the quiet threshold. This spans levels 7 and 8, taking you from $250,000 up to the $1 million mark. Here, your emotional experience makes a hard pivot from accumulation mode straight into preservation mode. We call this the invisible threshold because, well, nobody sends you a push notification to congratulate you, but the mechanics of your life change entirely. Just think about the sheer asymmetry of the math now. A 10% gain on a $400,000 portfolio is $40,000. That is more than the median household saves an entire decade. The engine of compounding is producing concrete, life-altering wealth at this point. Because of this, private wealth management, private equity, exclusive hedge funds, they suddenly start returning your calls. Psychologically, the day-to-day noise fades away. You stop checking your account on your phone every afternoon, and you start planning your life in decades. And then you cross the $1 million mark. But the mythology of the millionaire fades quickly, even if the math doesn't. Culturally, we build up this massive, glittering mythology around the first million. We think it means endless beaches and absolute freedom. But the truth is, you get about 72 hours to celebrate and enjoy the status of that number. By Monday morning, the practical reality of managing it crashes right back down on you. Because you suddenly realize that a standard, boring 2% market dip means $20,000 just evaporated from your net worth while you were literally eating breakfast. At level 8, you are no longer a retail investor, and the unglamorous realities take over completely. You're suddenly dealing with a web of institutional-grade custody solutions, establishing trusts, coordinating with estate lawyers, planning generational transfer strategies, and trying to navigate complex tax optimization across multiple corporate entities. The decisions absolutely do not simplify, and the anxiety doesn't vanish. The work doesn't disappear. The infrastructure around your decisions simply becomes heavier and far, far more complex. Which leads us perfectly to our final section, embracing uncertainty. Looking back at the entire arc of this journey, we have to face the ultimate realization about the market. At your $20 start, you were terrified of uncertainty, and you were completely ignored by the system. Now, at the $1 million mark, you are intimately familiar with uncertainty's patterns. You realize the market still does not care about you, and the system still won't protect you from being wrong. It's still a storm out there. The only thing that has actually changed is your position within it. You aren't in a rowboat anymore. You just have better infrastructure, better knowledge, and a much stronger emotional baseline to navigate the waves. So as you navigate your own financial timeline, I want you to ask yourself this. Are you stubbornly trying to control the market, or are you just developing a healthy relationship with uncertainty? Because the journey from $100 to $1 million isn't really about the money, the charts, or the apps. It's about how comfortable you can become with the unknown. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.